Okay, and we are now recording. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our kickoff event for Life Hacking 101 for the spring 2022. Oh gosh, it is 2022, right? The spring 2022 semester. So I want to welcome all of you. This Life Hacking 101 series is an amazing series with all kinds of things that we learn every week. And this first week is actually something that should have happened in the fall, but because of a convergence of events, it did not. So we are welcoming today Dr. Kimberly Koledoye. Good morning, Dr. Koledoye.
Good morning.
So I am going to introduce Dr. Koledoye, and then I'm just going to hand it over. She has let me know that she is really awesome about taking questions as we go through. So if you have any questions, please feel free to pop those into chat, and she's got it handled. So Dr. Koledoye is joining us this morning or this afternoon, for tips for reading like a pro. So Dr. Kimberly Koledoye is a professor and the program coordinator of the Academic Student Success First Year Experience Program at Houston Community College. Dr. Koledoye's extensive teaching background in literacy, English, education, and student success spans both the K through 12 and post-secondary arena. So this is a huge span, right? She specializes in course design, has led development teams in creating courses for college success, developmental English, integrated reading and writing, and accelerated co-requisite models. Y'all, this is a depth of experience that she's bringing into this. So I'm super excited. She's passionate about student success, equity, instructional technology, social justice, and providing professional development. She earned a Bachelor of Arts in English, Master of Education Administration, a graduate certificate in composition, and a doctorate of higher education leadership. Her research examining college success, women in leadership, and underrepresented minorities in STEM has led to multiple scholarly presentations and publications. And right now we get to hear all about her tips for reading like a pro. So Dr. Koledoye, I will let you take it from here. Good afternoon and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for such a wonderful introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with you. I am going to present, and if you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat. I'll be kind of monitoring back and forth, and I will be answering your questions as they come up. If I miss one, don't worry, I'll come back and I will answer that question. So I'm going to go ahead and get started by sharing my screen. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'll be checking back and forth. So this afternoon, I have the pleasure of presenting to you tips to read like a college pro. I think a lot of us find reading very difficult sometimes. We sometimes just need some assistance or just a review of some strategies to help us kind of get through all this college reading that we're expected to do. So again, I'm Dr. Kimberly Koledoye. I'm a professor and the program coordinator of academic student success. To most of you guys, that's EDUC 1300 learning framework. Most students take that course at some point, but even if you don't, I think you'll find these tips really helpful. So I want you to know that if you are not the strongest reader, don't worry, you are not alone. According to the National Assessment of Adult Literacy, about 43% of US adults lack the basic skills to read and understand college textbooks. So that's college textbooks and just like very or more complicated readings. About 43% of US adults have trouble, okay, in that area. Many adults have difficulty determining cause and effect, like what led to what, making inferences, summarizing, and recognizing the author's purpose. So if you're reading in your textbooks and you're having trouble summarizing or figuring out a sequence of events, I want you to know that you're not alone. Many adults struggle with this. But the good thing about it is that you can improve in this area by just kind of paying attention to a few helpful tips. So I'm going to start with my first tip. And the first tip is, number one, to find a good place to read. Pay attention to where you're actually reading. Like, is the atmosphere comfortable? Is the lighting good lighting? And when I say comfortable, I don't want it to be too comfortable, right? Most of us have a tendency to read in our bedrooms. Sometimes we read in our beds. And I don't know about you, but when I read in my bed, I'm going to conk out. So if you're trying to do your college reading, Reading in your bed probably isn't the best idea. You can read on the floor next to your bed, or you could maybe perch yourself on your bed and maybe use like a TV tray, but do whatever is comfortable for you, but not so comfortable that you're going to find yourself falling asleep, okay? Also, pay attention to distractions. Sometimes you think that you don't get it, but it's really just because you're distracted. More than likely, it's not quiet enough, or there are interruptions, there are people coming in and out. Try to find a place where you can reduce your interruptions. Put your phones aside. And keep in mind that, you don't have to just put them aside for hours at a time, but just put them aside for a time, silence them, and focus in on what it is you're actually reading. And then finally, is the location convenient? Sometimes students say, well, I'm going to do my reading at the library, but then you have to get to the library, and then you have to go during library hours, right? So sometimes the library is not the most convenient place to read, although it's a great place to read. Find a backup place. So if you want to read in the library, which is a fantastic place to read, also have a comfortable place or a convenient place that's easy for you to access. Second, I would say that you need to preview the text. And when I say preview the text, let me explain to you what I mean. I want you to read the title of each chapter. So before you sit down or you start reading, if you are assigned to read chapter 2 in your psychology textbook, you don't want to just dive right in, right? You want to look through the chapter, survey it, right? So you're going to read the title of each chapter, and you're going to kind of figure out what you already know about the topic. And the reason why you want to do this is because this is called activating your schema. See, each one of our brains, we have this kind of like a file cabinet of memories, right? We have information stowed away about things we've experienced, seen, read, heard about. And so when you access those memories and apply them to what you're reading, your brain kind of starts clicking. And that's going to keep you awake and keep you more engaged in what you're actually reading. So try to figure out what the topic is of your reading and see if you know anything about it. Also, read the learning objectives at the start of the chapter. Most textbooks have some type of learning objectives at the beginning, like it says like at the end of this chapter, students will be able to, and they list some things, or they may just list like the topics for the chapter. Take some time and read those, because that will again start getting your mind going so that you can think about what it is that you are actually about to read, and it can start making you kind of question what you're going to read. Again, all of that will help you stay focused on the text. Next, you want to skim the chapter. So you're going to turn the pages and you're going to examine all the title headings, subheadings, key terms, tables, figures. If you see a chart, you want to read that chart. If you see any pictures or diagrams, you want to understand what those diagrams are about. If you see any words that are bolded, you want to read those. And again, all of that is just kind of activating that schema, helping you get connected to this text. And then finally, before you read, turn to the end of the chapter and see if there are any summary materials for that chapter. A lot of times there's kind of like a summary of what the entire chapter was about, or there may be like a list of points you should consider. Whatever the case may be, most textbooks have some type of summarization at the end of each chapter. So you want to read what the chapter is going to be about if it's available before, and read what the chapter was about at the end. And once you've done all of that, then you're ready to start reading, okay? And this process should take maybe like 5 minutes, anywhere from 1 to 5 minutes, I think is sufficient. You don't have to dig too deep, but just kind of get your mind focused on the text and see what the text is all about. Next, you need to manage your reading. And when I say manage your reading, you have to make a plan. You can't just sit down every time it's time to read and just think you're going to just knock this thing out, right? You tell yourself, oh, I have an hour. I'm going to just sit down and read these 30 pages. Most times that's unrealistic. And let's talk about why. Uh-oh, I need to back up. Okay, so one is that you want to break up the reading into manageable chunks. And when I say manageable chunks, I mean, like, how much reading can you do before your mind starts wandering? Everyone's number is different. Some people can read 5 pages, some people can read 10 pages, some people can read for 20 minutes, some people can read for 40 minutes. Whatever the case may be, find your time. Like, whenever your mind starts wandering, let that be your chunks, right? So give yourself a time yourself, or give yourself like a page limit. So break up your reading and decide, okay, how much you're going to read it at each time, okay? Then you want to create a schedule and give yourself time reading again, but also breaks in between. So read for 20 minutes, then take a break for 5 minutes. Read for 30 minutes, take a break for 5 minutes. But you don't want to just sit and just read, because most times our minds start wandering and we kind of forget what it is we're supposed to be focusing on. So remember I said that you want to turn off your cell phone or silence it. In that 5-minute break, you can look at your cell phone, you can walk around, you can go grab some water, step outside and get some sun. That will help revitalize you, and then come back and read. So think about what time period works for you. However long you can find yourself focusing, let that be your break period. If it's 20 minutes, if it's 10 minutes, you just find the time that works for you. And then you also want to use your metacognitive abilities. And metacognitive means that you understand when you don't understand. So you have to continuously check yourself for understanding to make sure that you know what's going on. So you want to maybe stop after each page or section and review what you just read, explain out loud what you just read, okay? Reread it if you can't explain the reading to yourself. Because one thing we know is that if you're attempting to explain something and you stop, that's the part that you don't know. So if that's the case, then you know exactly where you need to go back and reread. So break up the reading into chunks, give yourself some type of schedule, and continuously ask yourself, or stop as you're reading and ask yourself, okay, what was this section about? Now, a study was conducted by a gentleman named Ebbinghaus, and he wanted to find out like how long it takes for us to forget information. What he discovered was that if someone tells you something and they ask you immediately after what they just said, most people can recall that information at about 100%. If we wait just 20 minutes, like if I give you this information, like the information I'm giving you now, 20 minutes from now, if you don't do anything with the information at all, then you will remember about 58% of what we discussed. After an hour, that drops to 44%. After 9 hours, which is for most of us the end of the day, that drops to 36%. After 6 days, so if let's say you have a class once a week and you come to class on Tuesday, next week you come back for the Tuesday class, if you've done nothing to remind yourself of the information, you're only going to remember about 25% of what it was that you learned the week previously. And then for most of us, we have tests maybe in a lot of our courses, maybe once a month or every three or 4 weeks. And when that happens, we are kind of starting at almost zero, right? Because after 31 days, if you do nothing again to move that information from your short-term to your long-term memory, you're going to remember about 21% of the information that you learned. So we have to do something so that we can stop this forgetting curve. And let's talk about what you can do. One is that you have to be actively reading, right? So you want to mark your text, highlight, and annotate as you go along. Now, I tell you one thing I've seen. I've seen some students who take a highlighter and they just drag it across the page as they read. And then when they finish, they have this beautiful yellow page, but they kind of have defeated the purpose of highlighting. As a general rule, you don't want to highlight more than 10% of your entire text, okay? So what you want to do is you want to mark certain things as you read. And when I say mark, write in your textbook, write on the pages. If you have a reading or a printout, right there. If you are using an online tool, like an online textbook, they all have annotation devices, ways that you can highlight your text, even online. Use those tools, okay? So mark definitions, like if you see a word you don't know, or they give you a word and then they define it, mark that definition. Or if you have to look it up, write it there, okay? If you see any facts, any steps, like you start reading something, you start realizing like, oh, okay, they're giving me the steps of the parts, the steps to do something, okay? If you see any important phrases, cause and effects, main ideas, you wanna mark all of those. So going back to the idea of steps, like if you see something like a process is happening, when you see the first part of that process, put a 1. When you see the second part of that process, put a 2, right? So continue to do that so that you can easily recognize those steps when it's time for you to review. Causes and effects. Maybe if you're talking about the causes of the Civil War, they may just start talking about the Civil War and then you start saying like, oh, okay, this led to that, to the Civil War, this led to the Civil War, this led to the Civil War. Okay, so mark, that's 1, 2, 3 causes, this 1 effect, right? So take your time as you're reading and write in our books, write in your books or write on your text to make sure that, that you have kind of like a map of what you were thinking while you're reading. Now, I know the problem is that in high schools, or in, I mean, probably K through 12, we are taught do not write in your book. Well, now you're in college, you paid for the book, go ahead and write in it. And if you're going to sell the book back to the college bookstore, it doesn't matter if you've written in the book or not. You're not going to get less money because you've written in the book, okay? If you sell to Amazon, that's a little different, but if you're just selling back to our college bookstores, they don't care if you've written in the book. And Amazon doesn't really care if you've written in the book, as long as it's not terribly extensive and pages aren't torn out and the outside of the book is fine. So annotate the text, okay? Write in your textbooks, highlight, and interact with the actual text. Another thing I want you to do is to read and think before you start marking. Sometimes we start reading and we say, oh, this is important, that's important, this is important, but you don't really know because you kind of have to wait until you have an understanding of the entire section. So if that's the case, I want you to read, think about what's going on, and then mark, then highlight, then annotate, right? Because again, as I was mentioning, sometimes you don't recognize that a process is being described until you see other parts of that process. You're like, oh, okay, here's a process. So read a little bit, think, and then do some marking. Again, highlight with purpose. Don't highlight everything. As a rule, less than 10% of the page is what you want to highlight. And you want to take those notes while marking on the page. So if you're reading something, you kind of want to summarize it, go ahead and write that on your page. If you have some questions about that section, go ahead and write that on your page. So in addition to writing on your text, I want you to consider the idea of writing a separate page of notes as you read, right? So a great place to start is to start with headings and subheadings, and you can turn those into questions. So for example, here, like on this picture on the far right, I hope you can see it, it says Chapter 5, Cellular Reproduction. So you may say, okay, so if you want to change that into a question, you could say, what or how do cells reproduce, or what is cellular reproduction? So you can start your notes page that way, and you can take each one of the headings of different sections and you can make those into questions. As you're writing, you want to write these notes on a separate piece of paper and you want to answer your questions. So if you say, what is cellular reproduction, as you're reading, you start filling in what cellular reproduction is all about, okay? You can use outlines, you can use mind maps, you can do bullet points, whatever is most comfortable for you. Don't think that you have to create some complex outline. That's not really necessary. You may want to do that as a second step. The best thing is to just read and summarize information, kind of get it down. Using bullets is just fine. And if you want to go back and recreate a visual representation by using mind map, you can do that as well. And then finally, you want to write a short summary about each section because, as I mentioned before, if you wait 31 days to do anything with this information or to review it or look at it, maybe do an assignment that requires you to remember this information, what you'll find is that you don't remember, right? So if you write a short summary about each section, then when you have to go back and review or get the information you need to complete the assignment, you'll see that you already have like a quick summary and you don't end up having to read the entire page all the way over. Instead, you just read those summaries and say, okay, I don't need this page. Oh, I do need this page. So again, annotating your text and highlighting, plus writing a separate page of notes will definitely help you start moving this information from your short-term memory to your long-term memory. And it will help you combat that forgetting curve. Step 6, you want to ask questions as you are reading, right? So when you're reading, you want to jot down questions in your textbook or in your notes. And as you're reading, you want to try to answer any of these questions as you read. Now, sometimes students say, well, I didn't have any questions. Well, that means sometimes that you're not thinking enough about what you're actually reading. If everything makes total sense, then you may have missed something. So continue to kind of read and think about what you're reading and do so throughout the whole process. Again, you want to try to answer those questions as you read. So if you come up with a question as you're reading, again, remember if you write if you turn the headings or titles into questions, you already have the questions you need, and then you can try to answer those questions as you read. Like, what is cellular reproduction? You can see, okay, well, this is cellular reproduction. This is the first stage. This is the second stage. And as you're reading, you can be jotting that information down. And again, that is helping you stay awake. Number one, you're not going to fall asleep if you're reading and writing, reading and writing. And you also are going to remember the information better. Another thing you can do is you can look for resources to help you understand. Sometimes you read something in one textbook and you're like, I don't know what they were trying to say. But the good thing is that we have the internet. There's no reason to be clueless, right? Because what's in your textbook has been written many other places, and there may be someone out there who can explain it to you better. So don't be afraid to Google information. Again, if it's in your textbook, it appears online somewhere. Also, go to your library, speak with your librarians, and ask them if they have any information that can help you with the topic that you're struggling with. And you can also go to YouTube. When I was taking statistics for my doctoral program, my professor was so smart. He was talking and it was like straight over my head. I didn't know what was going on. Okay. So, but what I did know is that in this class, I need to know what's going on. I need to figure out what I need to figure out. So I started using YouTube. I picked up a different textbook other than the book that we were using, which was an online book that I didn't understand well. And once I did that, I was able to kind of fill in the pieces and the gaps, and I was able to do well in the course. So you can find YouTubers. There are lots of professors out there who explain various topics in uncomplicated ways. And I think that you'll find that there are lots of people who can help you. And then finally, ask your professor to clarify the topics you still don't understand. You see, this is the thing. Whenever a student tells me that they're lost in a class, the first question I'm going to ask is, are you doing the reading before class? If you do the reading before class, even if the topic is difficult, you'll still have an idea of what's actually going on. And when you get to class, your professor can help you better understand that information. And while you're at home reading, you can write questions about information that you don't understand. And when you get to class, you can ask your professor directly about those very specific questions. But if you don't read and you just come to class and listen, and that's the first time you're hearing the information, it can be very, very difficult to remember. Again, remember that we have that schema, we have that file cabinet of memories. So you want to give yourself a chance. So if it's a topic you've never heard of, the first time that you read through the information, that gives you some familiarity with the topic. Then when you go to class and your professor discusses it, that gives you even more familiarity with the topic. And then again, you can ask your professor to clarify any concepts that you still don't understand. Keep in mind that you can ask questions like who, those six questions that we all know: who, what, where, when, why, and how. Those will help us. If you ask yourself those questions about every topic, do some deep learning and figure out what it is you're supposed to understand. And again, if you don't understand and you prepare before you come to class, your professors will know that you're serious. They know that you're not just asking them questions because you didn't do the work. They'll see that you're dedicated, and they will be happy to answer your questions. Does anybody have any questions at this point? I don't see anything in the chat. Okay, good. So I'm going to keep going. Oh, I think I see something that popped up. Okay, thanks. So, number 7 is it's important for us to look up unfamiliar words. We all have a tendency to read, and we'll be reading along, and then bloop, 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 and then go on to the next word. Sometimes that bloop, bloop, bloop is very important. And you don't want to be in a situation where you are just reading around words that you don't know and not really understanding the meaning of the overall text. So you have to get in the habit of looking up unfamiliar words. The best place to look up unfamiliar words is in the glossary of your textbook, because the little dictionary in the back of your book, or the glossary is what we call it, is the place where you're going to find the definition that is most aligned to how they are using that word in your textbook. But if that word doesn't appear in the glossary, no big deal, right? You should use a dictionary website or an app, or even if you have a physical dictionary, that would be great. I don't think most of us don't have one anymore, but you have different websites online that can help you. An example is like the Merriam-Webster or the dictionary.com. They all have apps. The Oxford Dictionary, they all have apps. And I think that every college student needs a dictionary app on their cell phone. I keep a dictionary app on my cell phone. So it's important for us to look up words that we don't understand. Don't just read around the words. Sometimes if you read and you just continue reading, you'll figure it out. But when you are talking about your textbooks and information that you're going to be asked to understand or produce later, you want to make sure that you have a strong understanding. So use your dictionary. And once you've looked up the word, write the definition right there on the page. And then you may want to write the definition on a note in your notebook. And that helps you start remembering the information as well. And then finally, keep a list of terms that you see in your major classes. Like in your first year or two at HCC, if you are planning to transfer to a university, you'll be taking like your basic classes, right? But when you get into the classes that are specific to your major, so if you're here and you're doing a workforce degree, you are diving immediately into classes that are going to help you actually go out into the world and work in that field. So you want to keep a list of terms that are germane to your actual major. For example, if you are in construction, if you're in construction management, there's terminology that's specific to construction management. There's terminology that's specific to paralegal studies. There's terminology that is specific to biology. So you want to make sure that you have a strong command of all that language, because number one, you're going to see it over and over again in other classes. So you want to take information that you learned in one class and bring it with you to the next. The second thing is that when you finish studying at HCC, we want you to be employable. And in order to be employed, you are going to have to do an interview. And you want to make sure that you have a strong command of the information that you claim you learned in college. So you want to make sure that you can talk the talk. And one way to talk the talk is to know all the words, all of the language, all the definitions, have a strong understanding of the different topics that are very specific to your major. So it's a good idea to kind of keep like a dictionary for your major. And before each semester begins, take some time and just kind of review that list of words that you know you're going to see in the next semester. Excuse me. Excuse me. Okay. For tip number 8, I want you to look for connections. Look for links between information in one class to another class, okay? Look for information between what you're reading and your own personal experiences. As I mentioned previously, if you are able to understand information because you have experiences with that previous experience with information, it will help you remember a lot more, okay? You also want to make sure that you are looking for links between similar topics in different classes. Like for example, if you're taking EDUC 1300, that course is a learning psychology course, right? So there'll be lots of topics that are discussed in that class that you may see in your psychology class, right? And so you want to kind of figure out, okay, are they using this information the same, or are there differences, right? So in EDUC 1300, we may talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And when you go to your psychology course, you may talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. More than likely, you will see that the information is very similar, or if not the same. But if there are any differences, then note those differences, right? The more you hear information, the more you see it, the more connections you make to it, the better it will stay in your mind. And then also pay attention to how information is similar between text. So again, if you're reading in one class and then you're reading in another class and this sounds familiar, go back and see what's the connection there. Are they talking about the same thing? Are these things similar? Is this information that you may want to use differently from one course to another? Just see if there are any links there. And then finally, are there any connections between this text and other sources, right? So let's say maybe in one class you're talking about in a language or English course, you're talking about an Oedipus complex, and then you watch a movie and you see, it does seem like there is a connection. That reminds me of this young guy's behavior reminds you of when you were reading about Oedipus, right? So it's good to make connections from what you're reading to other sources, to your personal experiences, to different classes, to other texts. All those connections help you keep information in your mind, and they help you better understand. Tip number 9 is to approach subjects differently. All reading is not the same. I think that you probably have figured that out by now. The way you sit and read online, maybe on your social media or articles that you're reading online, are different than how you're going to have to read your college textbooks. And not only are your college textbooks different from those type of readings, each one of your textbooks is going to be different, and you can't use the same strategies for each text, right? I mean, sometimes you need a hammer, sometimes you need a screwdriver. So let's talk a little bit about those different strategies. When you're using a math text, or when you're reading through your math text, you know that you're not going to have like a whole bunch of dense text or a bunch of words, right? You're going to see more symbols. You'll see formulas. You'll see proofs, right? So note those, right? Complete all assigned textbook activities. If you have examples where you can practice different processes or different formulas, take the time to actually practice there, okay? And make sure that you always understand the steps to solving a problem. Just like when you're reading in textbooks, how maybe you have to read and find the steps. In math textbooks, it's a little bit easier to identify those steps, but make sure you have a clear understanding, and you can still take those pages of notes where you're writing the steps to solving different types of equations, okay? So your not only will your textbook look different, but your notes should look different in your math textbook. Think about your science text. You want to make sure that you understand the concepts and terms. It is very important that you are very clear on what these words mean specifically, because sometimes you can't find words, these science terminology in your dictionary.com app. So you have to get a strong understanding of what it means within your text. If you can't understand how it's explained in your textbook, then go to YouTube, go to Google, and look for that other explanations of that concept. Make sure that you're underlining and highlighting and outlining those science textbooks just like you would in any other class. In your social science, so your psychology, sociology courses, and humanities text, you want to make sure that you are that you're paying attention to the terms of, again, a lot of that terminology is going to be unique to a very specific field, and you're presenting viewpoints, and you're reading through different viewpoints. And keep in mind that sometimes, like the ideas that are presented in your text are viewpoints of specific scholars. And sometimes these discussions or debates are ongoing. This may be the perspective at one time, but the perspective may have changed 20 years later, okay? So pay attention to those different controversies and see, okay, read, again, different sources to make sure that you have understanding of both sides of an argument. I think you also can pay attention to, you can also use these same skills when you're thinking about your specific workforce type programs. Like if you're in nursing, you're using, of course, you'll be using a bunch of science texts, of course. Again, you still want to make sure you understand the concepts and terms. You're still underlining and highlighting and outlining chapters. If you're doing something like IT, again, you're going to be using terms that are very specific to your major. Again, keeping that dictionary of familiar terms for your major is very important. Make sure that you have a strong understanding of those terms that are specific or germane to your major, and just continue to, again, read and write as you go. And I think that will help you understand. But again, keep in mind that you aren't going to read all of your textbooks the same, okay? Your math notes should look a lot different, of course, from your science notes. And not just because you just have numbers, it's just that you should be using more steps. You'll be doing, of course, more highlighting in your science and social humanities text, social science and humanities text. But whatever the case may be, you can use those same strategies of reading, highlighting, making sure, reviewing, and making sure you understand. And then finally, tip number 10 is to review the entire reading, okay? Now, I already mentioned that it's important for you to like read a section and ask yourself what it was about, read a section, ask yourself what it was about. If you do that throughout the text, this next part is much easier. Make sure that you are, when you finish reading, most times when we finish our reading, we're like, whew, I'm done. But that is the wrong thing to do. The next thing you need to do is to stop and review what you've read. Go back and look at those headings and see if you can explain those sections, right? Recite what you know aloud. So you read this section, or this heading was about cellular reproduction. Take a moment and review what you now understand about cellular reproduction. Say it aloud. And remember, if you come to a part where you can't explain it any further, you know that's the place where you need to go reread, okay? You can tick off each item on a list. Remember, you have those notes, right? You wrote questions, you have information. You can see, okay, you put these topics. Do you understand each one of those topics? You may want to go back now and create a visual representation of what you read, okay? So a visual representation would be something like a mind map, some type of chart or diagram. If you learned a process, maybe you can draw like a process map. So whatever the case may be, it's good to create a visual representation of your reading. And then you may want to take a moment and create acronyms or steps to help you remember the information, right? So you may have a long list of different, of maybe like bones in the body, and you will need to put those together some kind of way. You can create an acronym to help you remember the different bones of the body. Acronym meaning, you know, like NASA, or most of us, MVEM, Jason P, or My Very Eager Mother. You know, we know those from from math, right? So think of an acronym that can help you kind of pull all this information together. And then finally, if at all possible, discuss what you read with someone. Even if you're talking to your baby, you know, they just want to hear you talk anyways. Talk to them about all the information that you learned in your class that day. It'd be great if you can communicate with another classmate, because as you're discussing the information, you may find that you understood something differently than your classmate understood it, or you missed something that your classmate may have caught. So discussing what you've read is very important. It helps you kind of settle that information into your mind, and it also gives you an opportunity to check for understanding. I just have two more tips I think that are important. They're not necessarily reading tips, but they are good tips, I think. One is that you have to find a use strategy, like what works for you, right? When I have to sit down and read a lot of things, when it's cold in the room, I get sleepy. So if I have to read and do a lot of work, I make sure that the air conditioning is off if it's warm outside, or if it's cold outside, I turn the heat on, and I hate the heat, but I turn on the heat to like 80. And then I can sit and read for hours like that, because if I get too comfortable, I'm going to sleep. So that's one of my strategies. Some of us also, like when we are working or we're reading, we know that, hey, we need to like exercise in between. Sometimes exercising clears our minds so that we can take a moment and dive back into our work, okay? So if you're a person who likes to exercise, wake up in the morning, do your exercise, then settle down and do your reading. Or do your reading. Remember, we want to manage our reading in chunks. Read, take a break, go exercise, come back and get back to your reading. Or you may want to say, okay, I'm going to break my my breakfast up by my reading time. So I'm going to eat the first part of my breakfast after I've read 30 minutes, the next part after I've read 30 minutes, and so forth. So find a strategy that works for you. Heat and just temperature works for me, but what works for you to help you stay concentrating on your text? And then finally, be kind to yourself. As you recall from my previous statement, a lot of adults have trouble reading. They have trouble understanding. They have trouble remembering. So you're not alone. And even if you are the best reader, there will still be things that are reading that is difficult for you. There will still be challenges for you. And the reality of it is that you have the tools to understand the information. Sometimes you just have to give yourself time to do it. So be kind to yourself. Realize that we are not perfect and that we will constantly grow and learn. Maybe you can only read for 15 minutes right now without losing concentration. That's okay, right? 15 minutes, take a break, 15 minutes, take a break. That's fine. And as you continue to do that, you'll build your strength to read. So maybe it's 15 minutes and that start in January. By March, you're reading 25 minutes without having to take a break. And that's an accomplishment, because paying attention is not as easy as it sounds. So be kind to yourself, be forgiving to yourself. If you make a mistake, it's okay. Go back and reread. If you don't understand, take notes, go through your notes, reread, discuss it with your classmates, and have those questions ready when you come to class. I hope that you have found this information helpful. And if you want to learn any more about any reading strategies, or if you have any questions about what I presented today, you can feel free to contact me at the email address on the screen. I would love to answer your questions. And if you need help, I can point you in the right direction. So thank you for allowing me to present to you today. And I am able to take any questions if there's anyone who has any. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm glad it was very helpful, Stephanie. You are so welcome. So I'm just checking the chat. Thanks for the pointers. Thank you so much. Okay, well, can you have a copy of the presentation? Sure. Sean, how do we handle that?
So I am actually going to punt this over to Dominique. Dominique is back with us.
Okay.
Maybe.
To answer your question, Simone, yes. I will send out a follow-up email after the event, probably within the next couple of days, that will have access to the playback. And then Dr. K, if you're willing to share the presentation, I can also include that in that email.
Sure can. And if anybody wants a presentation before then, because I know Dominique has a lot to do. So if you want the information, a copy before then, you can just send me an email and I'll send it over to you. But I'll send it to you, Dominique, as well. And I dropped my email address in the chat. You're welcome.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Koledoye. That was awesome. And so many of the little, I was a student for many years as well, but so many of the little pieces really resonate with me as a librarian as well. At the beginning, when you were talking about the parts of the chapter, like reading the little summary bits at the beginning and then going to the back of the chapter to read, there are so many parts of a textbook that I used to just gloss over. And it's like, those are amazing little pieces that just really deserve time because they help so much. So
I totally agree. And I think sometimes if you don't have time to read, I'll tell you what, if you don't have time to read at all, the least you can read is the preface and the summary at the end. And that will give you enough to kind of at least know what's going on. So you're not sitting in class like, right? So take some time and at least do that part.
it's awesome. All right. So thank you so much. I don't see any questions, y'all. If you have any questions, Dr. Koledoye is here and she's also shared her email address. And then I know, Dominique, you have some wrap up things for student life.
Yes. So this event has been recorded, so it will be available for playback via our Student Life YouTube channel. And you will receive that link via email. And all attendees who stay for the entire event will be placed into a raffle, and 3 $25 e-gift cards will be awarded to those winners. So that will also be in the announcement that will be sent out. So it'll have the name of the winners. And then for my winners, be sure to check your student email because that's where the e-gift cards will go. And then if you are attending this event for Eagle Points, those Eagle Points will be awarded within 2 business days. Thank you so much, Sean.
All right. And thank you, Dr. Koledoye. I see it. How do I register? What are we asking how we register for?
Maybe for the raffle?
So Sean, if you are asking, okay, for the money, yes. So all students that attended this event will automatically be entered into the raffle.
Cool.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.